Hello everyone, and welcome back to another world building video for the Explorer's Guide to Ravean kind of session campaign setting. This time we're actually going to talk about technological developments within Ravean. Last time we talked about the magic that exists within the world, and kind of the different associations with that magic and regulation and everything along those lines. But this time we're going to actually touch on some of the technological aspects. As you can imagine, pretty much any group of people that have magic rooted into their capabilities for life has a odd mixture of the two. There are kind of the stereotypical science and construction and automaton kind of things going on. Gnomes for most prevalently kind of a group that leans into tinkering and clockwork type mechanisms. So you would call that kind of a scientific advancement, but at the same time, these advancements and these kinds of strictly material inventions can be augmented with magical kind of enchantments or effects of some sort, or can be used to channel said effects. So science can kind of be a weird, the middle of a pie chart, the overlap between magic and understanding and not, and then kind of straight up just science. So technology gets a little bit more interesting. Some of the more important ones that people will care about if you're playing within one of the settings are the things that I'll touch on. But basically, they have a number of these scientific developments that have shaped their trajectory. Technology heavily shapes the way that we in the world are capable of adjusting to a different lifestyle. Necessity is the mother of invention. So when we need something, we tend to be capable and more willing, if nothing else, to make our lives easier by putting some effort into making something to do it for us. Think about like the invention of the light bulb. Until then, we were kind of dealing with different sources of natural light or candles. And then now we can illuminate entire cityscapes by the springing of that one invention, and that has changed our lifestyle almost irrevocably. If you live in a more populated area, how often do you look up and see the stars? And when you leave that populated area and head out into the woods or out somewhere else in nature where you can kind of get away, when you look up, there are so many more for you to be able to actually see than anything else because of that light pollution. So that has kind of adjusted the way that any kind of Ravanian will end up dealing with their lifestyle based on what's prevalent and what's around. Kind of some of these scientific advancements are heavily influencing these societies, like I would suggest there, but there also are some that are a little bit more niche with limited scope. So there are some of them that are either kind of proprietary or relatively new, and so they've only really had a chance to influence in the current setting as it is right now, following along with the campaign. There are only a few that are actually capable at this point of making wider spread environmental changes, versus the majority of them are fairly local. Serac Waste has a number of these kind of sand skimmers that, while they could be used in a greater capacity in other regions, they currently are more heavily used by the Serac Waste as almost a proprietary tool or method of transportation. Something that gets a little bit more interesting because it's like, well, they could go somewhere else, but they're there for now. So the first thing that we kind of lean into is, especially when you're coming up with character creation and other things like that, do you end up having kind of a gunner? Looking at where guns are within the world of Ravean, at this point, guns currently have not been made officially yet. Development of black powder and other kind of explosive type of means are starting to come about. There are some fireworks and different explosions that are starting to be manipulated and used in kind of a broader sense, kind of almost like you would imagine a cannon to be more capable of being used versus a smaller handheld pistol or rifle. At this point, people that are trying to make a explosion that can happen within your hand are considered madmen. They focus on their efforts of this byproduct that is black powder. They're madmen and considered madmen mostly because if you want to be able to cause an explosion, you can do it, but do you want it to be right there on top of you? Or is the concept of being able to fire a very small projectile even valuable? Ships that do have weaponry are ballista based primarily, but some do have black powder cannons. And these kinds of things are kind of the forerunner to smaller pistols and other things, just on the nature of that. Thicker and heavier metals are able to contain an explosion, and so they're able to lob a heavy cannonball across the ocean far distances towards another ship should it be necessary. But they can't really figure out at this point yet where they're at. So if you were to have a character that wants to be a gunslinger or something along those lines within Ravean, at this current point, they'll probably be they'll probably be within your setting or within your world. One of the first people to come up with how guns came into being. Either that or they'll have to have that built into their story of someone that did make it and they have it now. That kind of a thing is something that I would work with the player with. But technologically speaking, they have some raw destructive power. They are primarily used for causing wider breadth explosions for mining or for defense, like those cannons would be used. They don't necessarily have a very clear refined potential, so it isn't necessarily as prevalent in the world yet. When it comes to transportation, though, much of the world is still reliant on horses and carriages. It's sailed. There are ships and different things that do exist, but utilizing kind of magical materials, there are some crystals that can be used to enhance this kind of different modes of travel. When it comes to the sea and the sky, the implementation of enchanted crystals has made it very, very possible for great sailing ships to kind of take off into the air, so to speak, and leave kind of behind the oceans that are relatively dangerous across the surface of Ravean, and utilize them in the sky. These sky ships are commonly known to exist, though they are extremely rare given the time and monetary efforts and different kind of struggles that come about in making one of these. Think about it. If they need to have a ship already that they can then enchant over a longer period of time with these enchanted kind of crystals and stones to be able to make it at least neutrally buoyant within air so that it can and end up flying and potentially then having at least some semblance of locomotion via the sails that they do kind of maintain. They have to retrofit this kind of a thing, and it's possible, but it takes quite a bit of effort. So the Serac Waste did kind of originate sky ships. They have a number of these ships that have traversed the world and been traded or gifted in the past to other groups. For example, the Ramont Empire until recently did not have sky ships until finally the new Sultan, as part of a peace agreement and trade agreement, has been kind of sending more and more sky ships back and forth for trade reasons, and then focusing primarily on here's maybe one or two that the royal family can use. And so there's a smaller ship that can be used as a sky ship that the royal family can use to traverse their kind of territory. It is very fast. It is airborne, but it is moderately defended and doesn't necessarily have much capability in the way of cargo compared to much of the other ones. Many of these other ones are larger kind of galleon sailing ships that can hold quite a bit of cargo and are heavily enchanted to do so. However, when you really just need a sprinter van, then you kind of have this nicely made sprinter ship that people can use to get around locally from the kind of ruling class. So it's kind of the equivalent of a, massive kind of plane that you would normally take in the real world here to go from your home to a vacation some distance away versus having a private jet at your disposal. It's kind of those differences. Over land, though, this has some similar technology to the skyships. The Serac Wastes, being the precursor of skyships, have also developed sand skimmers, like we've talked about recently earlier here. They're commonly known as sort of a enchanted sand-faring vessel. They float above the surface of the desert sands, but just barely, by like a foot or so. And then they rely on minor sails for propulsion. They have some minor abilities to levitate, but due to this levitation and the ability to kind of catch the wind on the open desert, they're able to travel at pretty rapid speeds. They utilize these natural dunes and kind of coast down one using gravity and catch the wind on the way back up the next one, so that they continue to go on. Kind of a sliding group. But you do have to be extremely careful using a sand skimmer, and being proficient and careful in terms of game mechanics, proficient with land vehicles, would allow you to be more comfortable piloting one of these, rather than misjudging the angle that you would need to lean on it with to be able to use the levitation adequately, so you don't just dig the nose of your sand skimmer into the dune that you're trying to travel up, and that at high speeds kind of sends you ejected across the surface of the sand. Makes it kind of an interesting thing to explore, is having these kinds of things. If you've ever seen Treasure Planet, which is a wonderful movie, it's kind of this main character's son skateboard, basically, is what you can picture the sand skimmer. That's what it'll look like. It's typically going to hold maybe 1 to 3 people, and you can have one kind of pilot and 2 passengers, similar to like a sailboat, where you would have maybe 1 or 2 or 3 people that are able to travel on top of it, with one person at this point, because of its smaller size, being able to manage the actual propulsion and driving, so to speak, of this sand skimmer, catching the wind with the sail and being able to leverage that as much as possible to keep things kind of working. This technology has been somewhat replicated within other nations, though it's typically in the Mistkeep Mining Guild. Quite a bit of their kind of adjustments to this technology has been for mining or carriages. They allow for kind of smoother rides for their passengers, and especially within their subterranean kind of areas. Having cave-ins and other things that leave debris on the ground that must be cleared is a reality, and it has to be cleared. But if there's a potential for you to be able to clear it without interrupting production, they want to take it. And so they're able to have this minecart full of ore levitating roughly a foot or so off the ground, and then people are able to kind of push it and have it go with relative ease in terms of propulsion, to be able to kind of get the majority of things that might cause a problem on railroad tracks or railing tracks for those kind of minecarts. Those wheels don't get jammed up on those because there aren't wheels. They're just levitating cart baskets. This is kind of a prevalent technology there, but not necessarily in many other places. Places like the Lebet Empire use quite a bit of this technology, but specifically for the ruling governmental class, which is kind of the federal and governmental organization, and more specifically religious leadership, because the religious leadership of the Lebet Empire is kind of the forefront power within the region. They kind of hold quite a bit of the power. This means that they have many of these kind of technological advancements put into comfort. And so carriages are more commonly those things that are augmented in this way, just due to the fact that these religious officials want a smoother ride and everything kind of along those lines. They do have some minor enchantments otherwise to kind of keep their ride more comfortable from a normal magical perspective. But this technological advancement is kind of what you would see any higher end religious official traveling through. They may have a horse-drawn carriage that, as opposed to being on wheels, would just be floating there, maybe a foot or two off the ground, so just for their ease. Engineering is relatively simple. They have more complex feats of engineering. They are kind of mixed with this magical influence, like we were talking about, with clockwork elements to be able to reflect kind of a more material piece of this technological advancement. Other technological advancements are kind of focused around what's possible. And so it gets weird in general when you're playing like Dungeons and Dragons, because there's a little bit of hand waving when it comes to a few things, it's all right, it's magic. But when you come up with kind of an engineered world and you need to know what ends up happening within said world, you kind of have to have some idea of where they're at technologically speaking. And that's a little bit more difficult because it tends to be this weird mixture of whatever it might be. Kind of bathroom usage within D&D is a little bit different than what you would otherwise predict, because you can kind of, like I was saying, hand wave a few different things away using either magic or, well, I just assume that my players are taking a bathroom break once over the course of their month-long adventure, at least once, because you don't really role play that. But what you do end up having to consider is the world that these characters are living in. Do they have a flush toilet? Do they have an outhouse? Is it just kind of a basic privy? Is it a chamber pot? Is it something along those lines? And those kind of things tie into how developed are the sewer systems. What does the development of the sewer system mean in terms of disease? Is it more rampant and more prominent in smaller cities because they don't have a robust sewer system? These are kind of discussions that you can have, and so you have this kind of pseudo plumbing, not plumbing kind of an element to it. Within Ravean at this point, I have it set up so it's not quite a plumbed system, but there are sewers present in many of the larger cities. Pretty much any city that you have on the map will have some semblance of a sewer for the most part, with the exception of a few. But at the same time, they don't necessarily have much, so it will tend to be stuff like a chamber pot and other outhouses and things that then kind of unnamed NPC heroes will end up kind of taking the crappy, no pun intended, job of emptying those kinds of things out. It's kind of just the easiest way that we can end up picturing the lack of apparent technology and the existence of what does exist. It's a little bit more of a challenge to kind of explore that kind of a thing. So engineering is relatively fluid. If it works for your game, it works. So if you were going to be using the Ravean setting, use what makes you comfortable within the game to explain different things. It makes it easier for you as like a dungeon master and a player to imagine what this world might look like if you're all on the same page. You don't have to make it fit. Make it fun. That's the point. So that's it for kind of the technological advancements aspect for the Ravean for this video. Next time, we're going to jump into kind of the additional races that are present within Ravean. There are quite a few, so we'll be doing that for quite a while. But for now, I will see you all in the next video. Don't forget, be good to one another, and thank you all for watching. Bye.